The 2019 DC vs. Dark Horse 2-pack by NECA, the 2020 DC Essentials, the 2020 Detective Comics 1000 variant, the 2021 Gold Label Year 2 box set, and the 2023 DC Multiverse. Which blue and gray Batman is the best Knightfall figure ever made? Place your bets, it's time for another Versus. Welcome to 5 Points of Articulation, where I review action figures and then articulate 5 points to help you decide if you want to add that figure to your collection. The 5 points I discuss are packaging, presentation, posability, playability, and price. I'm Jason, and if you enjoy my content, please like, share, subscribe, do all the YouTube rigmarole. For our purposes, I'm using Knightfall as a catch-all term for a blue and gray Batman from the 80s and early 90s. He's got to have the oval, he's got to have the blue trunks, he's got to have the capsule belt, but no black on the mask or the trunks. Also, I know there are some DC Direct figures that do technically fit the bill, but I'm trying to keep this one a bit more current. Starting off with the packaging, and I got this figure loose, so I don't have the box that it came in, but I do have what I believe to be a bootleg. I assume it's a bootleg based on the inferior paint job. The fact that it's so beat up it looks like Gorilla Grodd threw it around in a Samsonite commercial, and the complete lack of NECA branding anywhere on the box. That said, it matches perfectly what I've seen online. Simple Batman logos here, simple Alien logos here, and that's it. Not one single graphic anywhere else on the package. As for DC Essentials, I've had this figure for years and no longer have his box, but I do have the blue and gray version of DC Rebirth, and they're virtually identical. They both have a big DC collectibles at the bottom, a number in the corner, some shiny gold foil in the other corner, product shot and a number on the side looking like a book spine, and then on the back we get another product shot, a small write-up, and some other characters in the wave. Detective Comics 1000 comes in a DC Multiverse window box. What's interesting is that even though this figure got its own SKU as an alternate version of Batman, it uses the same artwork as the regular Detective Comics 1000, so I suppose one could be forgiven if they thought the wrong figure was in the box. I feel like I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but I don't have Year 2's box either. In my defense though, I did actually give this figure a full review. As for the official DC Multiverse Knightfall figure, I did just look at that box, and if you watched that video, you'd know I had a lot of fun joking around about the artwork not matching the figure. It does, however, match the artwork of the first issue of Knightfall. Even if it wasn't beat up, there's no way this plain Jane box is winning the round, and as much as I like the classy simplicity of DC Multiverse, I much prefer the creative, colorful, and informative Essentials. Also, I'm just now noticing that the tips of one of his ears snapped off, so I'm a bit bummed out about that. Be careful how you store your figures, kids. Moving on to presentation, and not counting the ears, Year 2 is the tallest at 7¼ inches, whereas the rest of them are either at or just under 7. NECA's DC vs. Dark Horse sets were revealed at Toy Fair 2017, but they weren't released until 2019 because of behind-the-scenes drama. This figure's distinct for having a beautiful cloth cape, it's very well integrated into the sculpt, and the amount of fabric is very generous. Granted, I'd like it a bit more if the cape came to here instead of here, and while I feel that the head might be a bit over-sculpted, I do appreciate the deep-set eyes and shading. And speaking of shading, there's shadowing on all the muscles to really make them pop. To my eye, the only thing that distracts from this figure are the hip balls, but we'll be talking about them more in the next category. NECA used the same basic body for Superman and Green Lantern, and then for heroes like Flash Gordon and the Phantom as part of their King feature series. The next one to be released was DC Essentials. The line was notorious for reuse, with the same basic body being used for virtually every male character. Despite that, I absolutely love this head sculpt. I also like how the cape is one solid neck piece going over the shoulders instead of being a separate bit that's glued on. That said, it is a bit short and underwhelming. And if there's one other thing I don't really like, it's a little bit of blue paint for the trunks. Stepping back and it really feels unnecessary. It's worth noting that they reused the gloves from their Rebirth Batman, so it has some line work that this version of the character shouldn't. It's not a deal breaker, but it's worth pointing out. Speaking of unnecessary details as the result of reuse, and that brings us to Detective Comics 1000. It's a variant of a more modern Batman, the only new pieces being the capsule belt and the upper torso with the oval logo. That said, because it is reused, the figure inherited piping and texture from the original. This also runs down the legs. Just like Essentials, the cape's a solid piece going over the shoulders and neck, and in general is much more epic. Less epic is the head. It's just way too small for this body, and the face seems kinda smushed, with just a bit too much of Bruce's nose poking bulging out underneath. Yet another exclusive is Batman Year 2. Similar to NECA, this one has a cloth cape but with a separate plastic overlay, which is honestly kind of awful. But also like NECA, at least they give you a lot of it. This time the head's a solid piece from the profile, and that unbroken sculpt is very dynamic. And similar to NECA, they recessed the eyes and gave the jaw some shading. In fact, I actually prefer the simplicity of the McFarlane. I really like this shade of gray, and I absolutely love the raised symbol. If I had a couple of criticisms though, I never cared much for McFarlane's penchant of having the glove fins shoot out of the sides. Additionally, the gloves are just painted on, but the biggest issue were the incorrect boots. Although this was technically its first release, the body was repurposed for 3 Jokers and Hush, and is criticized for being a bit on the tall side. If Year 2 is too tall, some might consider the official DC Multiverse Knightfall too short. Standing alongside the others though, and I don't really feel that's the case. Really solid head. Of all of them, it reminds me the most of Essentials, but with better painting on the jaw, and it cuts a pretty mean profile. The cape is a separate piece that's glued on, but it blends really well. Once again, the emblem has been sculpted, and aside from a little bit of chipping around the edge of mine, I don't think it's ever looked better. Also reminding me of Essentials, the fins have been properly moved to the back of the glove. In fact, the more I look at it, the more I feel like Essentials might have been the template for this figure. Zooming in, the belts are near identical, with neither one of them having any kind of buckle detail. It's also an improvement for having sculpted wrinkles on the fabric, better hidden ankle joints, and peg holes. To my eye, the only downgrade is the colors. The blues are fine, but the gray and the yellow are just way too bright. Also, as I said the last time I looked at this figure, I'm not crazy about how the cape lilts to one side, and as a lot of you point out in the comments, the legs really don't go together. Each of these figures has its pros and cons, some admittedly more con than others, but between the proportions, the colors, the shading, and especially the cape, for presentation, I've got to give it to NECA. Moving on to posability, and hope you don't mind, I'm going to be keeping the cape off of Year 2 for this category. From the top, and we have 3 different styles of neck articulation. NECA, Detective Comics, and Multiverse are on dumbbell joints, Essentials is on a ball and a hinge, and Year 2 is at a ball joint at the base of the neck. They can look out this high with Essentials and Multiverse in the lead, and Year 2 not even budging, and they can look down this far with Year 2 faring a bit better, but Essentials and NECA definitely having the edge. Essential secret is that extra groove for the hinge. Unfortunately, that means it doesn't get any tilt, with the best of the tilt going to NECA. Year 2 really surprised me in this department, and even with the cape on. They all have swivel hinge shoulders, but unfortunately Essentials cannot reach 90 degrees. NECA, Detective, and Multiverse can, but Year 2 can do even better. The McFarlane trio have rotator cuffs allowing for forward and back, which neither NECA nor Essentials can do. That said, all 5 of them have bicep swivel and double jointed elbows, with Multiverse having the deepest bend. Moving to the end of the arms, and Essentials and NECA have swivel hinge wrists, so in addition to swiveling, they can also move up and down. The McFarlane figures, however, have wrist balls. That means that they can swivel, hinge up and down, or side to side. Of the 3, and only Multiverse's wrist ball has been integrated into the sculpt. Moving to the middle, and Essentials and NECA have ab crunches and waist swivels, whereas the McFarlane figures have diaphragm joints and dumbbell waists. Using the ab crunches, and they can arch back this far, with NECA not really budging at all, but they can hunch forward this far, which I suspect is going to be better than the McFarlanes. Here we have Detective and Multiverse for comparison. Year 2, however, doesn't hunch at all. Astonishingly, Knightfall is almost comparable. That said, his arch back is way better, and in general the arch on these isn't too shabby. That said, all NECA and Essentials can do is swivel from side to side, whereas everyone else can tilt and twist, with Multiverse having the deepest tilt of the bunch. Below the utility belt, and we have 3 different style of hip joints. Essentials has ball jointed hips. He can kick just about 90 degrees and do a near perfect split. The 3 McFarlane figures have a ratchet system underneath the diaper. All 3 of them kick about this high, and all 3 of them have a perfect split. NECA, however, has swivel hinges. They're actually connected, so when you move one, the other one moves. Sadly, he can only kick this high. Also, the leg just popped off, but the split's really impressive. Less impressive is the fact that the upper leg is supposed to be able to twist, and it will not budge. Pulling out the NECA Green Lantern, and you can see what it's supposed to do. The McFarlane figures have a similar twist system, and are about equivalent on all 3. Essentials, however, is the most functional of the bunch, having an actual thigh cut. Granted, the extra cut's a bit unsightly compared to a McFarlane, but it's definitely not as distracting as this. Moving on down, they all have double jointed knees. To be honest, they're all mostly equivalent, but Year 2 definitely has the deepest bend. Of the 5, and only NECA has simple ankle articulation that can hinge and pivot. The rest of them have ankle balls that can swivel, hinge, and pivot. NECA and the 3 McFarlane figures have toe articulation, but NECA and Essentials have boot cut. Normally in these kind of verses, the combination of ab crunch and thigh cut seals the deal for Essentials, but not this time. While the McFarlane figures were all basically the same over and over, there was one that kept rising to the top. For posability, this round goes to Multiverse. Moving on to playability, and just to get this out of the way, Essentials doesn't come with anything. NECA comes with a Batarang and an alternate hand. Not hands, mind you, just the one. That said, he is part of a 2-pack with an alien combining a Xenomorph with the Joker, so you know, there's that. The DC Multiverse figures come with trading cards, but the card for Detective is a nice shiny hollow foil. This is really cool. Naturally, they also come with figure stands. Detective comes with a Batarang and a grapnel gun, but Multiverse comes with a Batarang and 2 alternate accessory holding hands. See, it can be done. In terms of accessories though, none of them can hold a candle to year 2. In addition to a gigantic blunt force trauma Batarang, he has an alternate accessory holding hand and a fist. This is great till you flip them around and realize that they're ribbed, not at all matching the hands he came with. The bigger feature is the cape. Not this one, this one. Just look at it with all its endless folds. If all that was enough, he comes with a cemetery display base. It features the crumbled graves of all of his loved ones. Put it all together and you're left with a truly breathtaking piece. But playability is more than being able to turn your otherwise functional action figure into a statue. It's also about how well your figures play with others. First things first, and we gotta start with Robin. This Batman design is classic enough that Dick Grayson is totally appropriate for a comparison. Of course, I suppose you could also pretend he's Jason Todd. The one on Batman's right is from DC Universe Classics by Mattel, and the one on his left is by McFarlane. Next up, and here we have Tim Drake. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you'd know that Tim is my favorite Robin. The one on the left is from DC Direct, and the one on the right is a more modern interpretation by Mattel. Fortunately, a more traditional one is on the way from McFarlane. Here we have Barbara Gordon, aka Batgirl. Barbara Gordon, incidentally, is my favorite female DC character. The black and yellow one's an Alex Ross design by DC Direct, and the blue and gray version is from the DC Multiverse Bat Family 5-pack. I chose that one so you get a pretty good idea of how well the blues and grays matched. For one final Bat Family member, and here we have Dick Grayson all grown up as Nightwing. The one on the left is from DC Essentials, and the one on the right is from the DC Multiverse Titans Wave. Although he was wearing a very different costume during Nightfall, Dick started wearing this costume in '95, so I think it works out. That said, I have decided not to include characters like Red Hood or Damian because they weren't around during this era. For Batman's most important ally outside of Gotham, and here we have Superman, I'm of the mind that how well Batman and Superman scale together is really important in a toy line, and with so many options it was really hard to pick only 2. The one on the left is the angry laser eyes Hush Superman, and the one on the right is from Action Comics 1000. If Superman is the most important hero comparison to Batman, the Joker has to be the most important villain. Similar to Superman, and narrowing it down to only 2 was a real challenge. For our purposes, I chose the Rebirth version on the left because it also gives you an idea of how well he'd scale with Arkham Asylum, and then on the right we have the 3 Jokers clown, which lets you know how well he'd scale with any other Joker using that body. Personally, I still think the definitive Joker is still ahead of us. That said, it is Nightfall Batman, so it's only appropriate we should look at Nightfall Catwoman. The one on the left is by DC Essentials, and combined with this Batman is what got me into that line, and the one on the right's from DC Multiverse. If you saw my Nightfall Catwoman versus, you'd know I'm not crazy about the Multiverse version, but if you've seen my new video on the Platinum Edition version, you'd know I feel very differently about that one. Also in the spirit of Nightfall, we have to bring out Azrael. After Bruce Wayne's back is broken by Bane, Jean-Paul Valley takes up the mantle. He also takes things way too far. I agree with the consensus of opinion that the blues are too bright on this Azbats, but these ones match pretty well, whereas the lighter grays are a better match on this one. For a relative scale comparison, of course, here we have Pizza Spidey and the Spectacular Spider-Man. Essentials is a bit too tall for Pizza and a bit too short for Spectacular, though I definitely think Batman should be considerably bigger than Spider-Man. This is a step in the right direction, and this one's just about perfect. In general, though, I much prefer the size of this Batman. And as always, here are all of our Batmen with Stealth Iron Man, but we can't talk about Nightfall Batman without Bane. I was wondering when you were going to get to me. If we're being honest, this isn't completely accurate to how he looked in Nightfall, but it's still the best mass market Bane option we have at this scale. Big as he is, though, I know what you really want to see is Bane taking a knee. The cloth cape does help, but the lack of backwards arch makes it look less like Batman's back is being broken, and more like he's being carried over the threshold. The arch on Essentials is great, but that hard plastic cape really gets in the way. Although Detective has a plastic cape, it's a lot more pliant. Really great arch on Year 2, and the cloth cape makes all the difference. But even with the plastic cape, Multiverse is hands down the best. The lack of accessories was one of the main ongoing issues with DC Essentials, though in general, the shorter figures did scale better with others. But Come on, this thing is incredible. I literally keep it on display in my living room. For playability, this round goes to year 2. This leaves us with nothing left to discuss but the price. If you got the NECA set for retail, and let's be honest, you didn't, it would have set you back $50. Now, an authentic one will run about $175. Essentials retailed for $28 when it came out, which did feel like a lot. These days, new in box, it'll set you back about $70. Detective was $20, but now goes for $40. Year 2 was $60, but now goes between $70 and $100. But the new Multiverse Knightfall Batman is retailing right now for $20, assuming you can find it. The demand for this guy is booming, but he's only just coming out, so be patient and don't let some aftermarket Bane break you. For price, this round goes to Multiverse, who wins the battle 2-1 to 1-1. Agree? Disagree? Sound off in the comments and let me know which one is your favorite. If you like this video, check out one of these. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back again real soon, but until then, play nice and have fun.